But in reality, there were lots of factory workers who've been struck. As you mentioned, right to strike. They've been thrown behind bars and charged with other penal code. Not with their practicing. Authority don't see that they are practicing their right. Very simply asking for better working condition and better pay, but they've been thrown out. Then who will be responsible to realize these practice are allowed, and this is their rights to strikes. Who is responsible for making realize this good law into practice?
Yeah. Okay. You're right. There have been industrial disputes. There have been strikes. I have to say that there is some problem actually in both employer and workers in understanding and coming to grips with the necessary approach to resolve their problems. Strike should be the last thing. The first thing should be talking to each other and negotiating. And I think some of what we're seeing is a transitional problem in that we do not have developed collective bargaining. We do not have developed structures where employer and the employees sit down and talk to each other. But you are right. People do have a right to strike under the law, and that law provides procedures for exercising that right to strike. And that should be that there is prior discussion, etc., that's negotiation to try and resolve the issues, that the parties look at using mediation services to try and resolve their disputes. But eventually, if they cannot agree, then they have the right to go on strike. Right? But when you are striking, you also have responsibilities. Right? And that is that you can strike within the framework of the law. To go on strike and the right to strike does not mean that that gives you a right to break other laws. Right? So it's important that people understand that with every right we have, there is a corresponding responsibility. The particular issue that you raise, yes, is a concern. And I think there is at the moment a contradiction between two different laws. Right? The labour laws give workers the right to strike, and they give employers the right to lock their workers out. All right? So that's under the labour laws as part of that process. Now, it also lays down that if you do exercise your right to strike, then you are able to protest, but there are some rules about that protest. You cannot break other laws. You cannot go within and try and block off a government building or a school or a military camp or something of this nature. You need to do it in a responsible way, okay? But that right is under the labour laws. The peaceful assembly laws cover other disputes. And our understanding is that they cover civil disputes, not labour disputes. Right? And so there seems to be a contradiction in the application of the laws, that if workers are on legitimate strike on a labour dispute, then we would understand that probably the peaceful assembly law should not apply. And this was the understanding that we actually received from the government. And so it's really important that we, as part of the transition, people understand that their actions are governed by different elements of law. So, and I don't know the detail of those particular cases, but we do know that there seems to be some misunderstandings and some contradiction between the way in which you deal with civil protest as opposed to the legitimate labour protest under the labour laws.
You are quite right, and at the moment, most of the strikes are also related to their minimum wage. Because the wage being very low at the moment, then what most of the strikers, the labour, they are simply asking, better condition and also the increase of their wage. But the response is that logging up, then that is also not the answer. So we know that 2 days ago, Labour Minister saying that there should be another minimum wage standard in this country. And both if employer and Labour decline to do, government were intervene, and they were determine what should be minimum wage. They've been having a parliamentary committee since 2013, but it's a kind of dialogue. What do you suggest? Because these are also related to some of the worker strikes. What do you suggest about this particular minimum wage issued in this country at this moment?
Okay. Well, firstly, I think we need to recognise that Parliament did pass the minimum wage law, I think 18 months, 2 years ago.
They found a special
but it is really important to understand that the minimum wage is actually something which is a part of your social protection floor. It is actually there as a protection for the most vulnerable of workers. Right? We need to differentiate, we need to identify the difference between a minimum wage and a paid wage. Right? Now, one thing that I can tell you that yes, it is important for a society to have a minimum wage for basic protection of the vulnerable workers. Right? But the minimum wage will not solve everybody's problem. Because in fact, the issue of productivity, the issues of working conditions, wages, etc., need to be addressed at the enterprise level as a basis of collective discussion, right? Looking at the practicalities of that enterprise and the needs of those workers to establish the wages and the conditions that are appropriate in that company or in that sector. Now, if we introduce a minimum wage and everybody says, okay, that's the wage, and everybody pays the minimum wage, that will not address the other concerns that exist from employers about productivity and competitiveness, and from workers about other conditions of employment. And so we need to recognize the minimum wage is a protection for the most vulnerable. It actually is, in most countries, the amount of money that somebody should get for going to work and being normally productive, right, for 8 hours a day. The basic regular hours. Above that, they would get overtime, productivity payments, bonuses, and other issues. Right? It is the payment for 8 hours work at work being basically productive. In many companies, because they will be negotiating productivities and things of this nature, their basic wage will be higher than the minimum wage. Right? Their income will be increased by working of overtime and a variety of other things. So the concept needs to be understood, because I think actually employers are talking about one thing and workers are talking about another thing.
Exactly. Most of the employers don't want to spell out the exact, after 8 hours, they call it pocket money, just because of their willingness. There is no proper spell out about this particular bonus or, their pay.
And workers often are looking at the minimum wage as being what they should earn in a month for doing all of their work. And that's not the minimum wage. So we're talking about different things.
What if government intervene? What would be the consequence?
Okay. Well, the reality is that actually government does have a responsibility in the establishment of the minimum wage. It is preferable to do as the government have done. They have established a national tripartite committee in the hope that that committee will come out, negotiate, look at good research, and come out with a recommendation which would then be applied by regulation. That's the way it works. If the parties cannot agree, then the government probably have a responsibility to make a decision. Yeah. But it is very, very important, frankly, and it is very understandable that this has taken a long time, because the minimum wage has a big impact on the society and on the economy. For example, the people with jobs want more money, right? But the people without jobs want jobs, right? They want a job. Now, if you set your minimum wage too high, right, you will have less jobs, right? If you set it too low, people will be dissatisfied because they're not getting enough money, right? So it is really important that actually the parties identify a level which is a protection for people to allow them to have an income with dignity, for life with dignity, but not life with luxury, right? But at a level which also allows employers to be productive, to be competitive, and to create more jobs, right? So, frankly, it would be better to continue negotiations to make sure that the rate is right than to quickly put in the wrong rate. Because if you put the wrong rate in, you can do a lot of damage.
That can damage both employers
So both-
and then
both
the
parties.
labourers, both.
And so it is actually very important that proper research is done, that people have a good understanding of the concept of the minimum wage, and that they recognise that the minimum wage for some people will be seen as low. But it's not necessarily their wage. They should be working and talking with their employer about productivities, about working conditions, and how actually can the employer's needs and the workers' needs be met together. So you've got your minimum wage, and then you have, through collective bargaining, your paid wages. It's a social security, social protection mechanism.
Okay, final message. Any message for this coming May Day for those workers in Myanmar in general?
Well, I think firstly, it is wonderful that we are in a position to be able to celebrate May Day. You're aware that there have been traditionally, there's been problems, and with the new government now, with the freedom to actually celebrate May Day is a major achievement. I think we do need to say that the workers' position, the rights have improved. There is still a long way to go. It is very important that employers and workers understand that they need each other, and that actually the collective workers can be a very good benefit for the employers in terms of their ability to compete in the global market. Building a relationship based on cooperation, not on conflict, is absolutely critical. And so I think this May Day, if we can use this May Day for employers and workers to continue that development and an understanding of the need for cooperation, that would be excellent.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.